Okay, so welcome to everybody and important support people. Apologies, I understand that, Alan, you're there now. Cool. I thought we had one for lateness, but he's now appeared on screen, so we're right. We won't do that. So everybody else is here. Are there any apologies? If not, we will move to declarations of interest. Anybody got
Mr. Chair, can I just briefly say that I have my appointment and my COVID appointment in about 20 minutes, so I will be absent at about 10 for approximately 20 minutes.
Okay, so we'll take that as an apology for a time period. So we'll go back to apologies. Thank you, Alan. So an apology for a unspecified time period this morning. Alan Beard is a remover. Yeah, thank you, Lloyd. Seconded Nicol. That will be confirmed when we say those in favour, aye. Against, no, that's agreed. Right, back to declarations of interest. None have been indicated to me. Public forum, so petitions and deputations, I'm not aware of any. Confirmation of the minutes. Take a motion that they be confirmed as an accurate record in the name of
I'll move.
Nicol, and seconded Lyndall. Right, so their accuracy is up for discussion. So are there any omissions or erratum? I will put the motion. Those in favour will say aye. Aye. Against, no, that's agreed. So we're moving along. We come to notification of extraordinary urgent business. Some supplementary reports on 6.1, 6.2. Questions, 7. No questions. Reports, 8. Do you have any reports? Very well so far.
Haven't been too far.
We need to have more lockdown.
Yeah, we need to be released so we can do stuff.
That's right.
All right. Right. So General Manager's report, item 1.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So there's a number of reports today. The first one relates to the submissions that we discussed with you in a recent workshop. You asked for these to come back to this committee, which we have done, and with your permission, Lucy Hicks can take you through the draft submission.
Thank you. Lucy.
Thank you. So hopefully have a look at the front page part of the submission. So appendix 1 was to capture your general feedback from the workshop that was held via Zoom whilst we were in lockdown. We tried to capture the kind of high level themes. There's a raft of detail that isn't here that we will be answering some of the detailed questions that there are feedback on for the freshwater farm plan regulations and also the slope map. But we wanted to bring this back to that front end of the submission. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but hopefully the things that you raised at that workshop have been through. So
you're right. We'll call for any discussion on the report. Personally, I found it was pretty accurately reflected what was raised in the workshop that we had. I was comfortable with it, but does anybody else have this? Yeah, Nicol?
It's just the one, we had a bit of comment there about the auditing role, and government's view is that it should be the regional council, and for efficiency, we might have approved ones, but if we've got to go out as a regional council and audit 3,000 or 4,000 plans, it's going to be a huge cost. It's going to be doubling up. Ideally, I guess MPI is a good example where you might have Quality Assure doing the auditing, but they'll do say 50 SNAP audits in Southland a year, just to verify. And I think that would be a much more efficient way if we could use the people that are going in the driveway for other things. It's a more efficient way of doing it. But obviously we also have to have a role. But so if we could capture something along those lines, that would be good.
Okay, David?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just also time frame on those audits as well. So something in there whether it needs to be added. Obviously, once people get into the routine, they should be audited every year or every 2 years or whatever. So it's just something that probably needs to be touched on.
And through you, Chair, just to clarify, there was some conversation at the workshop about the connection between the number of audits and performance. And we talked about that previously in terms of the incentivisation. Would you be keen for something of that nature?
Yes.
Yeah, Lloyd. Little, medium, Lloyd.
Probably 2 or 3 things. I'll just go through my notes here. I think these two, this one and the next one, are actually more connected than what people realise. One's a subset of the other. And I'm not sure if that's clearly outlined there. And the reason I say that is that the stock exclusion or critical source area management would have to be in the farm plan because it's on farm. And that actually takes in some of the slope issues as well. While it's mentioned, we probably need to say that each farm, regardless of what the national plan slope regulations are, they understand their own properties. So there was that. Probably a little bit of detail. The first thing I thought was that I'm not sure if it's as easy read as I wanted it to be. And it's really telling me a story. I didn't know whether you wanted to bullet point section by section and bullet point stuff out. So when the reader read it, the points were quite clear. I think the one part down below and on the certification auditor, partway through, to me, it feels like you've changed subjects partway through the sentence. You need another paragraph there. Or I can show it to you later anyway, but I think to make the point, we need to bring the paragraph down. I wasn't too sure under farm plan content, the comment at the end of that first paragraph, the council recommends the inclusion of a nutrient input matrix, fertiliser use, and is there a lack of emphasis on groundwater drivers? What are we actually saying there? I'm not totally sure what we're driving at there, because the fertiliser one, I presume that we would have a standard recommendation in our farm plan. But as people would go paddock by paddock and doing quite detailed soil analysis, they will have ups and downs. So some paddocks might get more and some paddocks will get less. So we're talking about actuals or averages. So we need to understand that people are playing at the margins. And I'm not sure if you picked that up. So that was, and the groundwater one, I'm not sure, because we don't test groundwater as an individual. I'm not sure how you would actually relate that in.
So through you, Chair, that was in response to the...
Lucy, can you pull your mic to you a wee bit? So Bonnie's having difficult hearing.
Is that better? Bonnie, is that better for you? I'll talk up, see if that helps. So that was directly in response to the questions that we discussed around the measurables that are within the draft regulations. So their focus on kind of how much meterage of fencing we put in. One of the discussions that we had on the workshop was what's a more useful metric for measuring successes.
Okay, so if I could just, because groundwater to me is something that's below the ground subsurface. Yeah. Not at ground level measuring fences and streams. I think because we use terms in a different way, the reader sees it and understands it differently.
And that sentence needs a polish, because that's what it's talking about, is the driver being the groundwater as opposed to groundwater measurements. So,
yes, yeah, so it's a terminology thing. Yep. In the next paragraph, we talk about the NES and the MPSs meeting a standard, but is the farm plan, change it around, is the farm plan a demonstration of how individuals are meeting those standards or the plans or rules that we put in place? Or is it, the way I read it here was we were we were driving that down from the bottom, but the farm plan is a response to the drivers. Does that make sense?
Can you point me to specific?
It's the last paragraph on page 13.
Yeah, so that's around the fact that what's in the draft regulations relates to the need for a catchment complex, and that the freshwater farm plans will need to make reference to those catchment level complex. So that's how they'll pull down that regional definition of what the MPS and the NES are requiring.
Yeah, so if I was writing a farm plan to respond to those drivers, I want to demonstrate from the farm or the property that it is meeting those standards by doing A, B, C, D, E, F. Is it clear? Because at the moment it looks like it's actually not. It's actually putting another layer in there.
So the process that obviously we're advancing through the limit setting work and defining what those region-wide objectives need to be, that's the layer above what we'll end up in. So we'd have to have the definitions of our visions and then down through into what the limit setting needs to look like in order for the freshwater farm plans to give effect to those. So you will still set the direction for the region, and then the freshwater farm plan structure will need to give effect to that direction.
Yes.
So what they're proposing is that the regulations will set that as a mandate, and then we get to define what that means for Southland and what it means across each FMU and each catchment.
Yep.
But again, there's probably some polish to clarify.
Yeah.
And did you have a view about what was better?
I think we're opening up a can of worms, Mr. Chairman. Really, it's basically saying we can do so much on farm to improve water quality, and then we get to this, what seems to be a barrier, and then we talk about substantial change. And unless we can actually take a community through that substantial change barrier and give them a future, then I think you're going to struggle to even get people to do that initial investment. So that's a bigger question, these farm plans, but they need to know that there is a 20, 30 year process here, and there's going to be some hurdles on the way. We need to soften the hurdles and make those hurdles achievable. So,
and in terms of our submission response, what we were seeking, and as outlined at the workshop, was the clarification of the expectation for what should be sitting where.
Yeah. So. Yeah. And the last one I think I've got is down on page 13, the next one down. Last paragraph in the certification auditor. We've got a comment in the last paragraph about merino wool, meat, QA and milk hygiene. These actually started off as a farm audit shed inspections, and they've morphed into something that's a lot greater. It would be good if we can incorporate those systems. I think you're trying to point that out here, so that we only have, 1 or 2 days of big auditing going on. We don't want multiple systems really. And those 3 standards that you've mentioned, they actually have very different drivers. So consistency of approach would be, because some of these might have to move a lot and some may not have to move that far. The next section is about prioritisation. I just wonder whether we've got some issues around the rolling country more so than we have around the flat, because they're in different places, different. It's easy to look after a flat farm, but a rolling farm is quite different. So I'm not too sure how we want to prioritise some of that. So it comes down to how do we get our biggest improvement? Are we just going to tick over some numbers and say, look, we've got all of dairy on board, they were easy to do and the numbers look good? Or are we going to go and do the stuff that has a long way to move and get the best movement from other sectors that are well behind, if I said that nicely, to some of the other sectors? That'll do in the meantime, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Rob and then Robert.
Yeah, and I think maybe discussion's gone on, but I just thought, thinking back to Mr. McCallum's comments around the farm plan and the bigger change. It's neither a generation, but
clear that these farm plans are going to be needed to show how each 10 years change is going to occur on the crop. So I'm absolutely clear we're going to need a longer term, if you like, maybe a strategy or something longer term to bring the community with us and show them a pathway. The farm plans are going to be critical to show how each property is going to make that change. And we're talking about prioritisation. I think that's really important in terms of our catchment action plans that we're going to need to do. But each plan is going to also need to show improvements, and some might be bigger than others. I guess that's going to play out as we get more finer understanding of the challenges. But I'm not sure we want to be saying you guys need to, you can go easy because you've got there. We'll have to that would depend on where the catchment was at. And it's pretty clear in the catchment there's a significant amount of reductions there. So, so priorities are important, but they'll come through the catchment.
Could I just follow on there, Mr.
Yeah.
I think my comment was really around that some sectors have done a lot of work and other sectors haven't. So not taking the foot off the pedal, but we actually need, where do we get our biggest return is what I'm trying to say. And maybe we need to rescope that a little bit to see where we can get the biggest movement from. And it may be rolling country more so than flat land, but all those are important, don't get me wrong.
I think the reductions are going to be needed. Some sectors have done work on farm environment plans, but I think it's pretty clear that there's also, that doesn't necessarily translate into reductions yet. So how do we then turn those farm environment plans into actually this is the reduction changes that we need to retain trust and confidence as we move our way through that. So I think we're on the same page, but I think it's, I'm not sure there's anyone's quite got the price for staying with it.
Robert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first is a request, and it's that, I've asked this before, is that when councils are discussing farm-specific issues like that, could they please say the farming community rather than the community? The community is the whole picture, in my mind anyway, so it's just a matter of usage. The second thing is, Lucy, just a suggestion at the top of page 14, where you talk about FWFP risking farmers incriminating themselves by committing goals to paper. I don't know if that's quite the right word, because I don't think they become criminals if they then fail to meet their. Would that be correct?
Yes, good point.
They wouldn't become criminals. So the wording does need to be reflective of the. But I think from the conversations that we'd had, it was relating to the fact that there could be enforcement action taken if we are connecting the freshwater farm plan.
I understand the meaning. I just challenge the word. It's a wee bit harsh. I'm sure
we'll find another one.
Right.
Yes.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you. We go to David.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, just a comment on where Lloyd was coming from. I think you really have to look at risk. It doesn't matter what sector you're in. Prioritise in that way. I mean, that's where we've been coming from all the way through. So I think that if we deal with it in that way, we'll certainly achieve the best results early, looking at risk.
I think through you, Chair, one of the points that we need to be explicit about is the fact that we want to determine the prioritisation at a regional scale. We don't necessarily want the rollout and the prioritisation to be applied via the regulations themselves. I think that was the feedback that we got from the workshop, so I need to make sure that that's explicitly.
Yeah, I think that's what was missing there was the explicitness. Yep.
Can I make a quick comment, Mr. Chair, before I go?
Alan?
Yes.
Well, I've got three others before you. Oh, you've got to go. So
I've got to go and get a jab, so I might, yeah.
You're on.
I'd certainly like the point about prioritising, because that's again where I sort of see that there's only so much resource to action these plans. We need to be able to channel that resource where the issues are. And I do support what Lloyd was commenting on regarding rolling hill country and or sediment loss. I've just been watching quite a bit of it go down the stream on our farm, and it does concern me that we should be working harder to stop that happening. And so that's the challenge of one of the contaminants getting into the water is sediment. I know we do have other contaminants to worry about, but certainly sediment is very visual, and I think that is one area that we need to focus more on. And there's a couple of typos on the bottom of page, or actually missing words on page 15. I hope you did spot those back in the third paragraph and the last paragraph. There's a couple of words missing, just twos and its. So I guess you would have seen those. Did you?
Yeah, we've got them.
Thank you for paying attention to the detail, Councillor.
Okay, all right, gotta go. Thank you.
Right, thanks, Alan. Was that supplementary to that? Because I've got 3 other people, but if it's supplementary, I'll take it now.
Thank you. It is supplementary. Just with regards to the reference to material flowing down the stream that we can see, I'm just wondering how we rate that as compared with the nitrate loss into water, which of course you can't see because the comment was about prioritising. Is there such a ranking? Do we need to be worried about one more than the other?
Through Chair, not that I'm aware of, no, but I think, and in terms of what we're traversing here, is about making sure that we're able to prioritise those areas that need urgent action at a Southland level, rather than it being mandated to us, which takes priority. So I think it needs to be part of the mix when we're talking about how we're progressing on the raft of water work we're doing. But no, I'm not aware of that. Okay. Take it back to the ranch.
Some problems might have a settlement problem, you know, so there's no one's worse than the other. I think it's a package, you know, they all contribute to the overall system health. So,
and some catchments have obviously got different challenges, which we could, depending on the direction, if the regulations are structured as such that it's upon the region to define how you prioritise the rollout, then we could determine, you could determine how we actually go about doing that and what we want to prioritise the action on.
Okay, we move to Peter.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, no, I thought you've covered things off pretty well here, Lucy. So thanks very much for that. Just want to pick up on Nicholas said right at the outset, and what Rob talked about too, and the discussion we had on this was the thinking that council will step back from this process due to resourcing. That's just going to be such a big once. But then what Rob just talked about, do we need to have some sort of visibility on the ground as a council? You know, everything's about localised decisions nowadays. This is what people want. I'm concerned that we step back from these 3 key roles in this process. You know, I think we need to be visible and get those decisions, make those decisions at a local level. So I'm just a bit wary of stepping back completely from those 3 roles.
So what we do, you know, is that we'll need to put together the catchment action priorities, the areas to focus on, and what the overall reductions are required. That's happening. And then the question of who does the plans, I guess at this stage, that's a live question, and we can place that one as we get into future annual plans and LTPs. There would be a significant investment and capacity needed if we were going to do this. The UCAN approach is done by to a standard by private providers, and our roles. So we would get the audit report and compliance reports, and we would then take action. But also at the same time working with catchment groups in terms of how is that group going, and in terms of how the overall catchments go. So there's some decisions being made around actually, do you want to do more than that? And it's been made. Yeah, and I think I'd be resistant to saying I'd advise you to do it now, because I think you've got to get a picture of what the action plans look like, and how the catchment groups go, and look at that, and then decide whether if you want to put in more capacity. This is going to need good connections to people, to the community and the farmers to actually make these action plans deliver. So, you could, so it's just about the additional capacity. But, you know, it's interesting in Canterbury that the sector's geared up to do that work. It's the system that's going there without any investment from council. It's geared up to do it, and council has a more strategic role. So that's it. So more discussions, and we need to look at that EQ model. Maybe that's something to do, to go up and have a look at. So how's it work? So, and we've got someone who's been involved in that here that can also talk to that. Not now, but thank you.
Okay, Nicole.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, just following up on a few things there. I mean, at the end of the day, these farm environmental plans will be living documents, but they also need to be a bit of a roadmap. And some of the stuff that Lucy's talking about, people putting in aspirational goals, That's a bit different from the farm plan being a default for having your intensive winter grazing plans in place, because if you don't, and that actually, that alone is going to drive a lot of people who may not have had a farm plan in the past, but if they don't get one, they'll have to get a resource consent. So we were talking about high risk, well, that's fine, but actually it may start off as a basic plan, but there's going to be a pretty high incentive for anybody who's doing winter grazing, and that might be a basic plan for a start that can be added on. But Lisa's comments about the groundwater, in a perfect world going forward, you really want people to be able to dial up their soil type, their subcatchment, their physiographics. This has got to be a tool that helps people make good decisions going forward. The other one I wanted to pick up on was the slope map. Now, in the regs for winter grazing, and I can see how it's happened, because there was pushback on the average 10-degree slope, it meant that the average meant that land that was not suitable in the high country to fence was going to get caught. So going to the actual maximum slope works on that side of it. But when you go to the winter grazing one, the average one is far better, because it would be very difficult to actually enforce that. And I know we've got time to actually keep submitting on this till next year, and I wondered why they'd done it. But when I looked at this, I can see you've had submissions on what for one thing, but it actually doesn't move across that well. What else we got there? I think that's most of it. But I think when we're talking about slow uptake of farm plans, but a good resource consent, that's going to be a fairly powerful incentive for a lot of people to actually get something up and running. And I think it'd be a surprise the number of through the industry good groups who have already got something in place, and they are continuing to do those things. But that 10%, is this part of this, Lucy? The maximum, or is that a different conversation for the winter grazing?
So the 10% is captured within the changes that are being proposed in the winter grazing regulation. So I can talk a little bit about that in the PLP.
Okay.
But the submissions relate to the changes to the slope map that got released at the same time as the package came out, and very quickly realised not that right. And there was a fair amount of feedback about the fact that the resolution wasn't great, wasn't. Feedback on.
Okay. Is there anything else there, Nicola?
No, I think that's me.
Lyndall?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just it's kind of a side issue, I suppose, and good to hear Chairman Horrell talking about these plans being living, breathing documents. So I guess my question is, what are we advocating as the preferred method of construction of these actual plans? Like, I mean, literally, is it going to be a folder in somebody's cupboard that they never refer to, which is completely pointless? Or are we advocating for some way for farmers and people who need them to have instant access to update? You know, we're looking at an online portal. Are we, do we have a preferred method of to recommend, so that if a farmer makes a change on in his paddock, he can upload a photo of it to his plan, and it's done there and then, so that it is a living, breathing, system. So I'm not sure whether this is the space to be advocating for that, but I think we should be discussing it at least.
So they won't be sitting in a cupboard, because they'll be required to be shown and returns made every year, so they'll be a live document, all of those things. So, whether it's in a folder or whatever, I'm not sure, but that's going to be over to each individual farmer, but we'll need to have an online facility to deal with these things. And
just in addition to that, there's some work going on at the moment across the regional sector and partnerships, and the regional councils are engaging together on what a system might look like to be able to have a consistent way that the mandate farm plan could be managed. So leveraging off of those who've got already existing systems like the ECAN model that Rob already talked about. But there are others who've got similar setups in industry groups as well. So there's a piece of work happening in the background under that freshwater implementation group, the directors group, that reports up to FB and FPI. So that work is underway on a system to go alongside what they mandate.
Lloyd?
Two things quickly, Mr. Chairman. I think it would be good if council could see what some of the things are out there now. Some of the Vontierra stuff is actually pretty good. So it would be interesting just to actually show you some of that stuff, just as a matter of courtesy. And then you can see what these plans actually have in them, because we talk about a plan, but what does it actually look like? How does it work? And what the follow-up is would be just good to see the mechanism of that. And I think that would give some fruit to the conversation. I just want to go back a little bit, Lucy, for my second point. We need to make sure that all this information we have is actually standardised and linked. We don't want to tend to integrate and have one set of rules that's basically separate from other rules that are more regional plan rules. So we need to make sure that whatever they are actually linked together and consistent, because otherwise we'll have issues in different sectors.
Jeremy?
Thanks, Chair. I probably need to comment in regards to, I fully support Lucy in regards to looking at priorities that we'll try and decide down here where the priorities are. I just need to make comment. There's obviously a couple of comments already where those priorities should be getting laid and the fingers get pointed. I don't think this is the time to be having those discussions. It'll be all the community, not just the rural, decide where those priorities need to be sorted. So sort of defending some of the other parts of society, we're getting pointed looking at the hills, but there's problems everywhere. So what I'd like to say.
Right. Couple of comments from me. What happens now, Lucy? We put this submission in, and how do we know they're going to take serious notice of it? And what's the process from here on? My second question would be, is this likely to come out as a national policy, or to some degree is it going to be regionalised? Because I think there are things applicable to each region. It's hard to imagine that the same set of rules would be as pertinent to Blenheim as they will be to Southland. And I just think that probably needs to be a bit of focus on the needs of each area in that. So is the expectation to some degree the result will be regionalised? It is.
Yep. So the first part of the question, the process from here. So I'll polish up based on your comments today, polish up the front end of the submission, and then the detailed question answers in the back end, and then we'll bring that back to you for you to see exactly where it lands. We're expecting a fairly quick turnaround in terms of them seeking this feedback and then before the regulations actually get enacted, possibly by the end of the year. The RMA required changes already in place, so everybody at the level is keen to get this right. So we expect to hear exactly how they've taken on our feedback. And in terms of the national versus regional, elements of it will be mandated. That's one of the reasons why they're seeking feedback across the range of topics, in terms of the role of auditors and the content, etc., because they're weighing up how much to nationally mandate versus how much to leave to the regions to make it locally bespoke. But I think one thing from conversations I've had, maybe we will be able to add from their conversations too, but at a manager level, we've been talking about there are opportunities that we need to continually reiterate to the ministry that makes sense to take advantage of at a local level. And that's that kind of, what's the context, what's the priorities, what do we think are the highest risks, what are our areas of concern that our communities want to take action on. And that's linked to the values and objectives piece and the limits piece and all those other good play. So we're leaning heavily on the broader kind of implementation of the NPSFN to say, you've asked us to ask our communities what's important to them. Let's do that and let us take that through into this one tool for how we achieve the improvements we need.
Yeah, thank you for that. Bonnie, did you have anything? Were you right? I don't want to ignore you. Righto. Okay, we have a recommendation on page 11. Would someone like to move that?
I can move it.
Thank you, Lloyd. Is there a seconder? Peter? Any further discussion? No, I'll put the motion. Those in favour would say aye.
Aye.
Against, no. That's agreed. We move to item 2.
So, Mr. Chair, can I just clarify just a procedural matter? So you've raised a number of issues which we need to just clarify in the document. This paper needs to go to the ministry next week. So are you happy for that to happen internally, be signed off by myself? Or do you want to see something being circulated? How do you want to handle the process?
Good question.
Well, perhaps it could be circulated, and if anybody's got some comments, they could feed it back. It doesn't have to be at a meeting. If it's circulated before a few days before
that's the safest.
Yeah. So will you have enough time for that to happen, Lucy?
So
well,
the
we can.
remainder of the submissions already drafted, the detail kind of stuff. So it was just that front end that we needed to make sure.
Yeah. Well, councillors would be happy with a 24-hour turnaround if they get it. They haven't commented within 24 hours. You've missed. You understand that?
Had a couple of bites of the cherry.
Go hard and go early.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for that clarification.
Item 2, Bonnie, who's doing this?
So Bonnie is going to join us on Zoom. Mr. Chair, we realise that while there is significant conversation at a workshop level with council on these matters, it's also important for us to be able to bring through and report to this committee on the matters that we discuss at workshops. So this is the first of these kind of matters for noting reports, which means that there is something available in the public domain on these issues.
Thank you.
So Bonnie is with us, I think, by Zoom.
Beam in, Bonnie, please. You're muted.
Kia ora, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Can we have a picture?
That's at the year end.
We know it's you.
Yeah, no, I think that
could be a robot.
That's been sorted. Can we get Bonnie up on the screen?
She's got to turn her. There we go.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair. Kia ora, everybody. As Wilma just noted, we've included an update here based on the People Water and Land Programme and the workshop that we held 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago, and I just wanted to reiterate the points in the paper for yourselves. So this is an update. As we discussed at our workshop, there has been significant progress in regard to the regional forum's development of their advice, and they are working hard on that at the present time. And just to note that there are upcoming workshops in the planning, and the first one in person with the regional forum is in October. And then the other parts of the program that I really wanted just to note is that, you know, the science is also progressing. So there's significant work being progressed on the contaminant load reduction and other interventions needed to achieve the draft freshwater objectives. And we're receiving feedback at the present time on E. coli and sediment from a technical stakeholder group, which will be brought into that process. And in terms of working towards scenarios for the regional forum to help with their provision of their advice, there has been work utilising our land and water science challenge work, particularly around mitigations, existing mitigations and future mitigations, which suggest that there can be some progress from implementing those towards those nutrient outcomes that we seek, but in most cases there's much more that will be required. And the other scenario that the science team have been working through is around sediment, and, you know, looking at the existing regulations that we have and what difference would those make towards our sediment outcomes. And that was quite positive in that if those regulations were put in place, then there would be significant impact on sedimentation and water bodies. So those two were worked through with you in the workshop, but that's just a high level overview of that work stream. And in terms of the communication space, just to note, we have a continuation of the environmental challenges conversation, which we started back in May with regional leaders, and continuation of that occurs on the 5th of October, COVID permitting. And that conversation is really focused on what could be done to support Southland Solutions, continue to explore, and what could be done right away, particularly in the next 3 to 5 years, whilst, you know, ahead of the planned change to Tuatahi development. And lastly, just to note that there's ongoing work around how we discuss the work we are doing with the wider community, which is something that Adrian and Gail from our team have been working hard on, and there's an intent to, you know, communicate more broadly starting in October. Those are my key points, so I really welcome questions from councillors.
Robert.
Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to continue with my theme about community and its ramifications or meanings, under community rollout there, you've talked about waiting until lambing and calving is over before you share some of that information. Is some of that information regarding the non-farming community? Are there actual practical suggestions being made to the urban community? That's my question. Or Bonnie.
Get that, Bonnie?
Yes, I did. So just to really emphasise, it is about rolling out to the whole community, not just the farming community as you've spoken about. But maybe I could hand over to Adrian just to talk a little bit more about the different kind of components of the communications rollout itself.
Peter?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, sorry, Adrian, you're coming to talk to us.
Yeah, real person.
Right.
Yeah, just through you, Mr. Chair, confirming, yeah, Bonnie's, that's what we're working on as a whole community approach. A lot of different components working into that, different groups that we're targeting to talk to specifically through the next couple of months. So just working through all of that at the moment. But definitely a broad approach.
With regard to that, thanks, Adrian. But what are some of the suggestions, just as a couple of examples, that you might be putting to the urban community?
Written some recently, no. Yeah.
So Adrian, we're working on, there's a plan that's being brought back to a workshop in some detail for you on the communications plan, which might be better that we bring the whole package back to you rather than try to find individual aspects. But the plan is being designed specifically around a broad range of groups, and it's been highly segmented by audiences. So it's very targeted, and so you'll get to see that quite soon. But I think that's probably easier than trying to get Adrian to remember the very specific things that might have been put together in social media on specific messaging. So, but just to let you know that that is coming, we've actually diaried some time to actually workshop with you in the next couple of weeks, actually, I think.
Right. Yeah, well, I think we're Peter Nicol then, Lloyd.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. It's good that you're sitting there, Adrian, on a question around communication, of course. So Tammy's role, and are they going to be full visibility with the communication rollout? And they're quite comfortable in that role?
Yes.
Okay, because it's quite powerful when we talk about community involvement, like Robert was talking about, to have that imagery side by side as partners.
Yeah, so this is a joint program. So yeah, we're working with Tammy, Maria and Dean and Nikki and co to support them and how we do that. But yeah, the intention is absolutely that this is joint and that visibility is there when we're talking.
So all of the messaging that we're working on, Councillor, has been worked through with, and Maria's been working very closely with the comms team on the messaging and the audiences.
Nicol?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think when we have a report that's going to be put out shortly that actually starts at the estuaries, there is certainly a community conversation there about the health of the estuaries. Some of the things that are going to happen going forward, the three water debate that's heating up, it's not just going to be a farming sector conversation, it's going to be a whole of whole of community conversation, and some people maybe they're going to pay more for Three Waters. But when you've got an estuary down here, we've had a look at that's got some real issues, and the desire to start doing something that may not get down to an individual level, but I think there is a desire to do some beautification, do something to stop some of the legacy issues from continuing.
Okay. Right, Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bonnie, under that scenario outputs, you've made a comment there that you've modelled a whole lot of estimated nutrient load reductions. Do we need to actually do some actuals, put the models aside and do some actuals and demonstrate some of what can actually happen, and it may be better or worse than the models? I'm just concerned that farmers, if I talk about farmers with Overseer and other models, they tell a story, but they don't actually always play out as they are meant to on the land.
Thanks, through you, Mr. Chair. Good question. I know that the team who are working on the science have been working with, what real numbers are available as well across our catchment. So they are also the basis of those models. And I think the important component going forward will be actually how we measure, if you like, sort of almost a freshwater accounting space of how you actually monitor continuous improvement or the impact of activities that we undertake to see what changes do occur. So the monitoring program across the region is going to be quite important for that, and reflecting back on what we were setting out to achieve, and are we making a difference, and what do we need to change or improve to make a difference. So I think those components are important. They are, however, using what information we do have in terms of our monitoring program on the ground to help inform those models. I'm quite sure that completely answers your question, but it's very important.
Just reinforce Bonnie's comments here. So this is the question I've asked, and so the actual on-the-ground measurements are used to inform that modelling, to fine-tune the model, to make sure it does reflect reality. I'm pretty sure going forward with the shift in emphasis from Overseer, we'll be seeing more in-stream and finer scale monitoring to see what's happening in the water, rather than relying on any other sort of models to say, hey, are we making progress on it? But the present models to actually predict or to talk about the level of reduction needed, the team are using, are verifying those with actual measurements, not just a model plucking out a figure.
Okay. Any other comments? Yeah, Peter?
Yeah, just a comment on that. It's an interesting concept. Do we go further than that? And what Lloyd is suggesting is that overstepping our bounds, or if we don't do it, are we comfortable with others doing it? Other NGOs taking up the role and doing real-time scenarios, and they presenting their information to the community, or should we be doing that?
I'm not sure what you mean by doing it. But,
well, I'm talking about overlaying these reductions on a farm system, and
so these are catchment reductions.
Yes.
So I think we've got to be real clear they're not reductions on a per property. That's yet to be sorted out actually how are we going to deal with that. And I think going forward, as I said, I think we're going to be seeing more actual in-stream measurements to see how we're making progress. Is the ecosystem health of these waterways improving, going in the right direction, as well as using modelling. So we've got our own SOE monitoring, which can give us some information on a catchment scale, but I think we're going to have to do more than that. We might not do it all, mind you, could be catchment groups or others. We're going to need more finer levels of detail of actually here's what the water quality is telling us. I'm not sure I'm quite answering the question, because I'm not sure if anyone wants to overlay some other ways of looking at it, where I think we're all ears. We're really keen to see. And
well, the question was, if we don't do it, are we comfortable with others with their information and skewing maybe the information to present things to the community? It's just a question.
Yeah. So so we've got a program of work
which is rolling out. I'm not sure, we're not looking to do anything apart from that at this stage. This might want to do it, and I think, you know, we're not going to be standing in the way of anyone who wants to come up with another perspective.
Well, for Robert then, Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just a question to Rob. Ideologically, or the big, sorry, the big picture, you're talking about a focus being not on monitoring or managing what's applied, so to speak. I didn't say that. But maybe focusing more intently on measuring what comes out of the other end of the water. But we've always talked about lag times. I can't, and I know there are other things going on, but I just wonder if there's a disconnect there. Wouldn't you need to be involved in both spheres, all of those spheres, to get a real picture of what's happening?
So I think some of this is going to play out as council shapes up how it's going to take the limit setting forward. My view is, and my advice is, that council provides a framework for people to operate in. I think it's pretty dangerous for us to be prescriptive. You should do this, this, and this. I think farmers have got the tools to manage their properties. We've got to lay out the council lays out a framework. Here's what you need to achieve in a catchment basis. How that translates to farmers is yet to be a discussion. We've got the forum will be thinking about and provide some advice at some stage to us. Does that make sense? You know, and we've got a lag time. I think in Southland though we're lucky. I think the work we've shown is it's 4 to 5 years from memory. So our lag times are probably less than others. This stuff isn't going to happen overnight. But we've got to be, you know, we've got to show progress over a first 10-year period.
Welcome back, Alan. We're on item 2. Lloyd.
Michelle, I think we're struggling a little bit here, and I think I am too, because we've got this high-level discussion and we're trying to land it. And I've been trying to think for a while now, how do we actually land this with some real energy? And we've got the Southland Demonstration Farm, we've got other monitor farms, etc. But I'm starting to get the view that we may need to demonstrate on a farm or a group of farms, putting in the mitigations that come from the regional forum or for other activities, and actually show this working in real life. And then I think if we can do that, it doesn't matter whether you're farming or whether you're an industry or whatever, the estuaries or whatever, I think then you actually get people go, oh, that's what you mean. Oh, is that all you want me to do? And I think it's easier because farmers basically are practical people, and they're going, how does the theory that you're telling me, this conversation, relate to what actually happens in activity on the farm? And maybe when we have these future workshops, we need to start to think about, okay, that's the theoretical driver, that's the modelling. I've got to land this. How do I actually land it in a way that I take the community with me? So that's what I'm trying to get at, Rob, is we may need to do some physical stuff on the ground or parts of the ground or support other people doing it in a collective view. And I think then this thing will actually have its own drivers, so people say, I see the difference. I see what you're trying to get at now.
That's the modus operandi of how farmers work, discussion groups, field days, that sort of thing. Yeah, David?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just to add to where Lloyd's coming from, there's mitigation practices taking place out on properties now. And I don't think we know enough about just actually whether they're achieving what we think they are. I know of some practices that I don't think anybody's got any, it's a feel-good thing, but I don't think we actually know just how well they work. And what you're suggesting, I think, would be ideal. Yeah.
I'm certainly, you know, not averse to that. I guess our council's key role, though, is responsible for the water quality of our waterways. And so, you know, I think you've got to take that in mind as to what the core business is, how do you best achieve those outcomes. And I think working with industry and others in sort of demonstration type situations or model catchments, you know, we're working with that Aparima, that catchment there with the catchment groups, you know, and we're certainly encouraging, we've been talking to MFE and government to try and attract an investment to do exactly what you're talking about. And had a lot of success. We've got the minister coming down week after next, so we can she was there. We can lobby him at that stage. But yeah, so I'm certainly not but I think we've got to be real clear that actually our focus is on achieving these outcomes. And how do we do that? We've got a regulatory role, but you know, part of it's also encouraging an investment. We've talked at some length around significant wetland in Waituna. You know, that's the sort of thing I'm keen to see if, okay, is that going to work? Is that going to result in significant reductions? And then if it does, let's go and see how, or talk to communities about how they might invest in those sort of things. So, and I'll talk communities, but also farming communities. But I'm not, thank you. But also the wider communities. I know there's a wider conversation as well as a farming conversation.
We've got Peter, Nicol, Lloyd, then Robert.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. It's quite interesting, the 2 points of view. You're concerned about being prescriptive. Lloyd saying, maybe we may have to take a few more risks and go beyond a bit to show people the future. I'm talking to people that are quite influential in farm systems in Southland, just casually talking. And they believe they're going to be stuck at the bottom of a brick wall and they're not prepared to look past it. It's an attitude. Perhaps we have to show them, take a few risks and show them a bit of the future of what it could look like without being prescriptive, without trying to control that end of it, but just ease someone around the corner of the brick wall for them to have a look around. And once they see, hey, there is a future there for us, it all opens up. So somewhere in between the two, I think.
Yeah, I don't think there's much actually between us. I just think we've got to have an outcome focus. We've got to encourage and drive innovation. We've got to take some risks. We might farm, do a bit of farming, but also we've got to make sure industry and farming community is standing up and taking that risk as well. So, you know, we've got to have ownership. That ownership's going to come not from us doing it, but actually doing it in partnership or encouraging others to do it. Yeah. So, you know, I think we're on the same page. And that's why we've got this environmental hui going on with the other leaders and looking at actually what can we be doing right now to actually have a pathway forward. So yeah, I think the screaming agreement around the need for us, I just push, I emphasise the outcome focus. We've got to be focused on that outcome that we need to achieve. So others have got to be part of it because we can't do this on our own. There's the language we're using. We'll be using this when we go with contaminant reduction.
I just wanted to just reinforce your point. I mean, one of the things that's really critical to us is the catchment scale of this, and to be able to demonstrate that catchment scale interventions are actually going to work is a critical part of our conversation with Ministry and the Minister, because you know it requires significant investment. And I think if we could see that investment in Southland, we would actually be able to see change quite quickly in relation to maybe some other regions in New Zealand. So that conversation is quite active. We haven't landed it yet, so we're actually really keen to. The Minister wants to see change, and we've got a plan for that if he wants to actually invest here. So I think that's that would be a critical piece of conversation for us going forward. But it's very much focused, particularly in Aparima was a really good catchment for us to be looking at, supporting. So we have a very good business case for that. That's with government right now.
It comes back to the unknown territory past good management practice, and that's the void that farmers are very unsure about that. And sometimes when you're unsure about that, you won't move and you won't look past it. So my view is, maybe we need to give them a glimpse past that. What does that actually mean, that large percentage past GMP?
Yeah, no, I understand your point. Thank you.
Okay, Nicol?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I agree with Rob that we actually need to create a framework where people can make decisions. But Lloyd's point and Rob's point about if we get some working models up, like if we get funding for something something at Waituna and it works, then you might get subcatchments going forward saying, well, actually, if we got together and funded something as a group, we could make more progress in some cases than we can on an individual farm basis and go so far there. But some of the science behind some of the stuff, and we just need to be able to actually verify it. That could well be the way, one of the ways forward. but we've got to take people on that journey. And the minister's coming down, we want to be able to come up with something positive to actually say, look, we think this could make a big difference, because people are frustrated. We've got overseer that has now been really relegated to a good model, but it's not a regulatory tool. And I think going forward, that's going to mean we're going to need more fine measurement on a sub-catchment basis to actually be able to validate are the improvements coming through, because it's either that or you go to the input model, which has real limitations.
Big Lloyd.
Big Lloyd, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of things. One, we've got a big urban constituency, and they need to be convinced that things are happening, because they're talking about the moaning and dissatisfied farmers as usual, and it would be useful to be able to demonstrate to your urban audience that things are happening and that things can be seen. So maybe a sort of a model thing that you could invite people to come along and inspect and say, well, if you plant this and if you do this, these practices, this is the outcome for that. The other point was we could just note that there's the arrival on the scene of another, I think it's an iwi-based organisation that's doing very large scale nursery development, which will be very interesting on obviously a scale that's much bigger than anything we've had before, with the idea of using locally sourced natives to revegetate, I think with the help of the Jobs for Nature program. So we just note that with interest, the arrival of that program.
Yeah, we're working with them.
Yeah.
Set up.
Yeah.
Looking at their future program.
Robert.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, just first to commend Rob on his nuanced use of the word community. It doesn't take long, does it? And just to address what others have said here, Lloyd's suggestion that Environment South become farmers by having a demonstration farm, I think is quite interesting. But then it points to the same problem I've been pointing at today. Probably we should also buy a property in the town and retrofit the house, do the whole composting thing, and so on, so that urban people can see a model of how they could make changes too. So when we buy the demo farm, Lloyd will also buy a demo urban property.
We've already got land.
I was suggesting, Mr. Chairman, just for clarification, that we didn't actually buy property. We actually put a management input into it to change it from where it was and the numbers, and we had an understanding of a base. And then we put in these practices on top, no matter where you are, because it's anywhere in Southampton, it may be in multiple, and you see, and you actually monitor and you see and you demonstrate that you can take a property from point A to point B through these inputs. So I wasn't actually suggesting ownership.
Right, I think we've pretty much exhausted discussion now. Bonnie, thank you for your input. You can see we've had a fairly lively discussion. There's a recommendation on page 16. Would someone like to move?
Happy to move.
Thank you, Nicole and David. Those in favour would say aye. Against, no, that's agreed. We move to item 3, wintertime air quality.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Owen is going to join us. He's in the waiting room. One of the responsibilities in terms of reference to this committee is to receive our science reporting. And of course, we have the wintertime air quality result, which we've just released a small statement about in the last couple of days. So Owen's here to brief you about those in some detail. You note in his report, he's got a summary of that information. Also just note, however, that while we bring the air reporting here, that the issue of the home heating loans is a matter for the OPAC committee. So we do that. And also to note that both the home heating loan scheme and the behaviour change initiatives are new credits in the LTP. So we will be reporting on those. You may recall when we discussed the ongoing discussion around the levels of service at a recent workshop, that we pointed to the fact that those were 2 projects which we were looking at internally scaling up and managing our budgets to fund. So that's just in relation to the considerations on item 20.
Thank you. Owen, would you like to talk to us? You need to unmute. Thank you.
Morena. Yeah, so basically just to provide an update on where we've got to with our winter monitoring. I'll take most of what's there as read, but just provide a summary and then be available for any questions. So through this winter period, we've continued to monitor PM10 and PM2.5 in both Gore and Invercargill. We've also monitored PM2.5 in Winton. And of course, the PM10 monitoring is done in accordance with the National Environmental Standards for Air Quality. And so we have been assessing compliance with the daily standard there, which sets a limit of 50 micrograms per cubic metre. We commonly talk about the number of exceedances that we record against that standard. And so we'll talk a little bit about that today. I guess there is some positive news for our monitoring overall, and that this winter we only recorded 3 exceedances of that standard in Invercargill, which is the lowest that we have on record, while Gore only didn't record any exceedances of the National Environmental Standards. So some really positive results there, heading in the right direction. That does still mean that Invercargill is not complying with the National Environmental Standards for air quality. So there's definitely still work to be done there. And also for Gore to be considered to remove itself of the polluted airshed status, it needs to continue that, continue meeting the standard for 5 years. So still work to do in both areas. No foot off the gas pedal, so to speak. Looking at the slightly longer term trends, there's obviously exceedances, and figure 1 there kind of shows a bit of a reduction over time. We've also had a look at the peak concentrations, so the maximum 24-hour average that we record at those sites. And we can see that the maximums are coming down as time goes on, which is a positive sign showing that there is some reduction in concentrations there. So we also do monitor PM2.5, which is not yet currently in the National Environmental Standards for Air Quality, but councillors will be aware that MFE have proposed some changes to those standards and are looking at including a PM2.5 standard. So we've been monitoring in preparation to have that information available for any future standard that comes in. And so we've monitored PM2.5 in all 3 towns, Invercargill, Gore and Winton. And we can see that in Invercargill and Gore, there are exceedances of that standard. We recorded 23 exceedances over winter in Invercargill. And Gore, unfortunately, we had some equipment failure during that time, but we did, I think we've got 6 there in total. So 4 times during May and 2 times during August that it exceeded the proposed PM2.5 standard. So just something to bear in mind as we move forward with air quality planning, that if there is a daily standard to come in, that we will still need to keep working to achieve that. Also, finally, a quick update just on some research that we have underway, and that is looking at a spatial study of PM2.5 in Gore. So we have contracted NIWA to undertake that research and provide us with some information on the variation in PM2.5 distribution across the Gore urban area or the Gore airshed. And the reason that's important is that the National Environmental Standards require us to be monitoring in what's typically termed the worst location. And so we need to make sure that our monitoring is representative of that worst location in that airshed. And we haven't to date done that spatial investigation in Gore. So this is going to provide us with some really valuable information as we look to move to a future PM 2.5 standard. And finally, just to finish off, I guess I can provide a very quick heads up that the World Health Organization guidelines have been in progress to be amended for quite some time now. And I understand they are looking to release those, I believe it's tomorrow. And MFE will be following those guidelines very closely in terms of what they bring into the National Environmental Standards. So particularly around that PM 2.5 standard. So just a brief update on that to finish. So I'm happy to take questions.
The first one's from Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Presumably the exceedances are directly related to temperature. I just wonder if there's any other factors that are identified, because a cold frosty night you're burning more fuel. I'm just wondering if there's any other factors that have led to the exceedances apart from temperature.
Yeah, so temperature does play a big role. I would say probably wind speed is a more direct indicator of whether or not we'll have an exceedance. So obviously higher wind speed will move pollutants away, disperse them quicker. Definitely we do tend to see exceedances more on a cold evening. But what you may notice is that people will use their heating for a variety of reasons, and it's not always the coldest day when there will be burning happening. So even when the temperatures do get slightly elevated, you'll find people get into those routines of setting the fire and using the fire, and so there's not always as strong a correlation with the temperature as we might expect.
Jeremy.
It's more or less the same question as Lloyd has indicated. Obviously, the wind, you've indicated about the wind. Is this, but are you indicating that there is a trend improving? The trends are improving, or obviously you can take into consideration the weather,
climate change,
the major impact. But it's over the time. Do you think that the trends are improving?
Yeah, so there's still a little bit more work to be done. This is a very, very kind of high level assessment at this point. More work to unpick some of those climate trends over the longer period. What we can see is that the concentrations are decreasing over time, and that the brief look I've had in terms of temperatures show that in the warmer years, I suppose 2019 was an example of that, where it was particularly warmer. There was quite a drop. But the difference for winter temperatures between last year and this year at our monitoring sites haven't been quite as significant. So there is a trend of PM10 concentrations decreasing over time.
All right, Nicol.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I think the graph does give us a little bit of comfort. When you look from 2011 to 2018, it was pretty flat-lined. The couple of low years, and obviously the number of frosts and wind are a factor, but looking at this graph, it does look like we're making some progress in the overall exceedances. The other thing, I guess, that you raised, which is quite interesting, is that the 2.5 measurement is actually a higher bar. And if the World Health Organization actually ramp it up further, the bar is going to get higher going forward. So we may be making progress, but we might still have a hill to climb. Would that be right?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. So a large portion of our PM10 is PM 2.5, which is why we're seeing those the high number of exceedances of the proposed PM 2.5 standard. So there will definitely be more work to be done to achieve any future PM 2.5 standard. I guess just it's important to kind of bring that all back to the reason is for public health, And so we often talk about the numbers and exceedances and achieving a standard, but it's actually, there is a good reason behind it. And that's, obviously World Health Organization will present that information in the next few days.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kia ora, Owen. Sorry, your face is over there, but the camera's over there, so I'm a bit confused. Just wondering, with that WHO guidelines coming out, are you anticipating that might trigger the our own NESAC requirements quite soon? And if so, are you resourced and ready to go to make that happen?
I can answer, I guess, the first part in terms of that information leading to the changes in national environmental standards. We can go on what MFE have indicated, and that is that they are waiting for World Health Organization guidelines to come out. They've said that if the World Health Organization guidelines indicate a significant change from what they originally proposed, then they would come back with consultation. If it was fairly similar, then they would be moving forward with the proposals. So I'm not expecting there to be a significant change. And so we would expect the MFE to be moving forward with that. Any time in the next sort of 6 to 12 months, it'll be continuing on to bring that standard in. And in terms of resourcing, I guess, there may be others a better place to answer questions around the planning side of things. But certainly the monitoring, we have the monitoring in place that we need to be doing, and the resourcing to investigate and understand PM2.5. But there's still a power of work to be done in changing our planning regulations and also in that education space. So we do need to be actively engaging with the community to make them, or not make them, to help them understand all that standard and the necessary change.
Thanks.
Here, Louis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just, in my mind, I'm just wondering whether we're missing a part of the stool, a leg of the stool here. We can chase PM10, PM2.5, and we can do all that, but unless, in my view, it's actually related to the health of the community, we can show a downward trend between what we're seeing in the ground and what we're seeing going through the hospital. I'm not sure if that link is strong or weak, but it would actually be better for our communication going out to the community about what the driver is behind this. So I'm wondering whether, is there a way of actually linking medical data in as a subset into this picture?
So there is a piece of work that's been updated, and it's the Health and Air Pollution in New Zealand study that does provide an indication of the health effects by region. It is very difficult to do those studies for smaller urban areas. I believe there may have been 1 or 2 in Christchurch to give you an indication of the size of population required to undertake that kind of assessment. For other locations, the strength of the relationships aren't strong enough with a smaller population. So we rely on the Health and Air Pollution in New Zealand type approach, which is, I understand, being updated and again expected kind of anytime soon. So we will be able to present that information and provide some more health details for the community to help them understand that messaging.
Yep. And it's important for the communication.
Absolutely. I've always held the view that there's a trade-off. If people turn off their burners that are dirty and have a colder, damper house, there'll be a health consequence from that as well. Oh, sure. And somehow the balance has to be evaluated. And Robert.
Yeah, thank you. That's quite right, Mr. Chairman. And information like that would leave urban community vulnerable because they're not able to respond. Whereas, for example, in the farming community, there's this research that's been done about the effect of nitrates on bowel cancer. And there's plenty of industry that's willing to get up and say, no, that's not right. But that wouldn't happen in an urban community. So you have to be careful of how you put these things.
Okay, any other comments? If not, there's a recommendation on page 21.
Mr. Chair, can I just ask a question too, please?
Sorry, Alan, missed you.
Yeah, yeah, no, I am here. I'm still in my truck, but I will get out of my truck at some point.
Go for it.
I was looking at Winton, and it wasn't that long ago that Winton had difficulty, I think, even complying with PM10, and now you're saying that Winton is looking okay at PM 2.5, which is, I guess, if you're a Winton resident, that's great. So have we looked into why Winton's turned their town around? Is it to do with fuel source? And I guess I've always been a little bit concerned about we're still burning too much lignite. And I know it's commercial, and I guess at the moment we're still able to advertise products, and the consumer is then allowed to buy it. But is there still an issue, or a major issue, with burning brown coals and this extra smoke that they create that's going to see us really struggle to? I mean, obviously we haven't achieved PM10 in Invercargill. We've got a big task ahead of us to get to 2.5. So at what point can we put more pressure on the burning of brown coals in the city?
Just to the first point about Winton. So Winton, and it's meeting that PM10 standard, it had on occasion exceeded it once a year, which exceeded the 24-hour average standard, which meant it actually complied with the overall standards. It allows for one exceedance per year. In recent years, it hadn't exceeded that standard. And so we'd progressed the monitoring to PM 2.5 to make sure we were prepared for any future 2.5 that came in. In terms of sources up there, we haven't completed a source apportionment study in Winton, so it's difficult to unpick exactly what the change has been there. But certainly, if it looks like PM 2.5 is going to be an issue there, it would be worth us investing some money into understanding that further. At the moment, it's not looking like it's going to be an issue, so we're just continuing that monitoring for a period to make sure. In terms of the burning of coal, it would make an improvement in our airshed if we weren't burning coal. It wouldn't solve the issue. There's a lot of other factors that need to be worked through before we are going to see compliance with the standards. And I'm talking there the use of wet wood, the burning of household rubbish, the damping down of fires. So a lot of behavioural burning behaviour things that need to be resolved before we're going to see a significant improvement. Coal is part of that, but it's not the sole answer. And I guess the use of coal comes back to the point raised before about people going coal in their homes, and it's finding that balance. And so that's historically why that decision hasn't been made to remove it entirely. I understand the mood is changing slightly, so that may be another conversation to be had down the track.
Right, Peter.
Yep, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Oh, and we, Nicole made a point just early on about frost days, and of course we're getting, and we're told we're going to get, which is happening, less frost days as we go on into the future, and wetter winters. So with wetter winters comes wind with rain. Is that aiding us?
I expect it will be aiding us. I haven't yet done that analysis to conclusively say that is contributing significantly to the results we're seeing, but definitely we do see that windier days, we don't tend to get as high concentrations, the pollutants disperse easier. So any increase in wind over time will help us in that in those 24-hour average concentrations.
Jeremy?
Just in regards to Robert's comment in regards to that country folk sort of challenge things, and then the urban, they'll just say, no, that's fine, we'll just go. It might be a wee bit naive in regards to saying that there'll be parts of the city won't agree with the urban sector. I couldn't work out what you indicated, that they'll just agree to everything.
No, what I meant was there's agencies such as farming industry representatives who will step up and challenge science, whereas in the city, it's city folk, and someone's, whatever they're burning on their fire, they're not going to get they haven't got an industry group ready to step in and go into bat for them, so it's quite, you have to be just a bit careful about how you approach the two groups. They're not the same.
It's fairly much outside the report. I think we'll just pass that comment there. All right. So if someone like to move. Yeah, thank you, Lloyd. Seconded. Thank you, Lyndall. Those in favour would say aye. Against, no, that's agreed. Item 4, policy planning division work.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You see this at every meeting, councillors. Just a couple of things that Lucy will answer some questions on. One of them is, one of them I've already mentioned on page 27, relates to the Clean Air Loan Scheme to be reviewed. I know it says delayed on that. That is something that we did discuss at our last workshop. We are looking at how to bring that program of work through as a now identified level of service and through the OPAC committee. And then on page 28, the strategy and policy timetable, unfortunately, is kind of out with some of the time frames that we need to respond to central government in terms of matters for consultation. We do need to be bringing the work to you as council, as we've done today, in relation to 2 of these items that we need to respond to MFE soon. And I note that there are council meetings where both of those discussions can take place in those timeframes, but it won't be able to come to this committee because it won't meet again until November.
Lucy, you got a comment? Or you're going to respond?
So through your chair, just to add to Paul's comments on that, I'll take the bulk of it as read, but I'm happy to answer any questions about the work programme. But I just want to talk a little about those 2 consultations that we're currently working through. So there's one on the managing of wetlands. This is principally, thank you. This is principally a technical change to some of the provisions within the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, and specifically in regard to definitions around what's a natural wetland. So they are seeking consultation responses on making that definition clearer, more explicit, easier to actually interpret. There's also a raft of additional clarifications they're aiming to make through regarding the provision for certain activities, such as biosecurity activities, and making it easier for councils, etc., to undertake maintenance and restoration activities around natural wetlands. So we've got, it is quite a technical piece, but as Wilma's alluded to, we can come back with our draft submission on that to the 13th of October session. And if anybody wants any more information, I've got kind of what is a skeletal staff submission at this point, so I can get into some of the detail if anybody's interested. The only other thing I was going to talk briefly about was, as was mentioned earlier by Chairman Horrell, the intensive winter grazing changes as well. So the government's proposing changes to the intensive winter grazing regulations that are within the NES, the National Environmental Standard for Freshwater. This is in direct response to the work that we did down in South, the Southern Advisory Group work that we did last year. I can't believe it's last year, but last year. And that there's some really good stuff there. There's some good things that they've heard and have taken into the new draft regulations. So a few to highlight there. And as you mentioned before, Chairman Horrell, the maintenance of the slope at 10 degrees, but changing it to a maximum, not an average. The subsurface drains that were previously caught under one of the definitions would be explicitly excluded and managed via farm plans. They didn't go with the piece of advice around the applicability of the threshold. So they're retaining the 10% and 50 hectare threshold. They have changed both the resowing, or proposing to change both the resowing and the pugging impracticalities that we flagged. So both being changed to either as soon as practicable or reasonably practical steps. So both of those shifts are positive. They're also changing the focus to a definition of critical source areas and mandating that as an alternate way of managing some of the higher risk areas. So we're contributing to the regional sector submission. What I would, I'm happy to talk through and answer any questions that any of you have on what's in those draft regulations. I think from a council perspective, we don't need to wade too heavily into a submission on the intensive winter grazing regulations, given that we're referenced about 20 times as being the cause for why these changes are being made. I think that's quite a strong message. The Southern Advisory Group's work was broadly supported, and an increase in practicality as a result. So staff have been through, and we've obviously we're taking feedback from across the organisation. But yeah, happy to answer any questions if you've got about either of them.
Yeah, first one is to Nia Lloyd.
Thank you. A couple of things. I'm wondering, under the wetlands, do we need to get very clear what is a wetland and what is excluded? And I've got a hat on basically saying, in the Waituna case, we need to be very clear about whether the Waituna lagoon is actually captured or not captured or partially captured. I think that would be really good. I'm just looking at your item 6 there, land transport or the transport management. We're going to have some work coming on there about speed limits. And while we put some feedback in, I'm expecting that to come through. I haven't seen this stuff yet, but I'm coming through. But also we're linking very much. There's a Zoom meeting very shortly, this week and next week, about working as a South Island. I had some discussions with Russell on this as well, and we're pretty keen to try and be as linked up and be as loud as we can under the resilience, especially thinking about the Ashburton Bridge and connecting communities and how we access freight through the freight channels and where we park it and where we inland port it. So there's quite a discussion going on there. Now that may mean we may need to do some work or have some commentary. Now I'm not sure what that looks like yet, but I know that's coming towards us with a little bit of pace, I think.
So through you, Chair, and in response specifically to the speed management question, I talked to Russell just yesterday or the day before, there's been some progress made. The Transport SIG rather, have been lobbying pretty hard about the feedback that we've received or is being received from that speed management provisions. And we're likely to hear where that's going to land in the next little while. As you say, it's coming at us pretty quick. Russell is teed up to do an item to the November strategy and policy. It's hoping that by then we'll have some more certainty. The Regional Transport Committee is obviously meeting next week. Yeah. I think next week. That's what
Friday.
Yeah.
Friday week.
On Friday. Yeah. And he's got a meeting this afternoon with the Ministry on RM reform and how to be thinking a bit more broadly about what the inclusion of transport needs to be within those changes. So as always, Russell's tapped into a whole raft of good stuff, but the RTC will be putting together some more in that space, and he's prepared to come back with an update, hopefully a positive update on the speed management stuff next meeting.
David.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of questions, Lucy. One under the Southern Economic Project. Obviously, I'm not sure whether there's been changes there, but obviously the Regional Council, Regional Forum doing scenario testing through that. Are we going to be able to actually get some report on that, or is?
So the through you, Chair, the scenario testing that is being presented to the Regional Forum, which my understanding is that the next joint workshop you've got coming, you'll be seeing more detail about what those scenarios outputs look like. Yeah. We're joining up the science scenarios and the economic scenarios. They're the same. We're managing them the same way. They're comparable in terms of what it is that what questions are being asked.
Right.
And it's just different models being applied to give different outputs. So you'll get the science output and an economic output. So yes, that will be being workshop with yourselves and with the TAMI board in advance of the regional forum scene in October.
Right. Oh, that'd be good. The other question is just the water and land plan. Is it topic B being stalled by 52A, or is it other issues as well?
Through you, Chair, there's another item on the appeals we excluded in this meeting so that we can talk about it in more detail.
Right.
Obviously, because it's still live, we're not able to talk about it as freely in a public session. But yes, still merrily bubbling away.
Right. Thank you.
Robert.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Lucy. I enjoyed your use of language in your report where you talked about us not wading into the raising issues. But my question is around wetlands, and you're talking about protections of natural wetlands. And I'm wondering about constructed wetlands and about wetlands that are restored that were natural. So, I mean, are those details being attended to?
Through you, Chair, that's exactly the complexity that they're struggling with. The definition of a natural wetland in the regulations is very problematic because it doesn't rule much out or much, it's not explicit enough, and given the wide variety of wetlands and their status across the country, it's highly problematic. Also, people have some RMA fun got different definitions for wetlands within their own regional plans. So so there is different court processes playing out where wetlands of different kinds are being defined differently and at different processes. It's very, very complicated and convoluted. One of the big trips is the natural wetland definition, though. So
particularly given that Southland is a wetland. For us, it means a lot.
It means an awful lot for us, and it also a number of our because so many of our provisions are under appeal as well. That's us and 2 other regional councils who, off the top of my head, I'm not able to bring back to the fore of mind, are struggling with this because their live matters before the court. So a number of, I think it was Greater Wellington, were taking this matter to the High Court for resolution, and so MFE had kind of front-footed some of that to say we need to fix it in these national level.
Yeah, Lloyd.
Yeah, I suppose my turn is an example of the problem there where you have 2 ecosystems there depending on whether it's open or not, and both of them are natural, and one of them sort of fills up with brackish water and there's an ecosystem there, and it breaches through, and then you have a tidal ecosystem with a new lot of plants and a new lot of birds moving in. So
there's it's very complicated because of the temporal nature of when you define a wetland to be natural. At what point are you setting your pole to say this was when it was natural, or before this point it was something else, and when does it become constructed? And
Michael?
No, like the present definition is quite problematic. You could have a few rushes on a paddock that's been developed that could be captured, and that's not the intent. So we need it clarified because we don't want to lose any more natural wetlands. But there are cases where there might be something that is falling into the category now where somebody might say, well, I could construct something further down that would actually do a better job. So you need to have that clear, because at the moment it's not, and so hopefully we'll get some improvements in that one.
And through one of the knock-on effects of it has been that because of the way that it is defined, it's catching a bunch of good activities that you want to be encouraging, such as the biosecurity and maintenance activities. And that's obviously problematic for our own business, but it's problematic across the board in terms of how we protect those areas from invasions from exotic species, etc. So he's working through.
Okay. I can move it.
Yep, moved, Councillor McKellar.
Mr. Chair, can I just a very, very brief comment?
Yep, okay.
Just again for under transport management, I just wonder whether for clarity as to what we're talking about, whether we need to specify the report period that RLTP runs for, because we've completed this one, the 21 to 27 report, but just to give clarity as to what we're referencing there. So we need to put the date period that report relates to, because there's obviously previous reports that have...
That'll be done.
Yeah.
Right, we've got to move it. Is there a second?
Can I just
raise
small procedural matter might not need the motion. So, councillors, because we are outside the strategy and policy period for both the wetlands and the intensive winter grazing, I just want to ask you for your advice on two things. One, can we circulate drafts to you ahead of the council meeting for comment? Because we would like to be able to bring the papers for approval to the council meeting. We won't have an opportunity to workshop. Are you happy with that?
Yep. I think that's the preferable option of not seeing them.
Thank you. And yes, it's completely preferable to not seeing them. I concur. Secondly, I'd just like a brief discussion about the intensive winter grazing paper. I hear my colleagues' views on this matter. However, I do think that we did take a reasonably important role with central government on this. And while I'm not suggesting that we extend the program of work too much, I wonder whether there is not some small submission from us, or at least, you know, a brief commentary from, you know, from the chair to government on this matter, just so that we've got a position as opposed to just a position with not, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say just, but we're clearly part of the regional council submission, but I wonder whether we wouldn't like to make our own commentary on this matter. Just your views on that.
Very keen for your views on that, because what I thought we could do is thank you very much, Ministry, for listening to our complaints, and this is in good shape now type submission, with some detailed commentary about anything else that you specifically want to
What's the time frame on that, Robert?
Well, see, that's 7th of October. We will circulate where we're at with this, but I'm just suggesting that it's something quite brief.
I think it would be quite, I think it'd be quite courteous to do that, as you suggested, Lucy. I think it would be good. Some of the points have been picked up, and we can actually reinforce those. The sowing date's probably the one that gave the biggest angst. People are right now, I think, struggling to do anything, so that some of those dates weren't workable. But as soon as the weather's right, they'll be into it. You know, flat stick. So I think we can be positive and thank the government for their movement to understand the wider issues, and look forward to other activities that may have the same framework.
I feel there's an opportunity here.
Would be good to actually say, look, we're happy to be a part of this. It would be nice to be a little bit earlier, but we've got some value we can add. So I think that'd be good.
So we can circulate a draft of that also.
Jeremy?
And that's the thing. I think it's hugely important to thank and be involved, because these processes will be exactly what we want to go in the future. But it'd be also very important to acknowledge all who are involved in that, the individual farmers and fishing game and the industry group, like for the whole package, because there is a wee bit of grey area there at the moment where the work's being done. So it'd be very important from council to really thank whoever's needed.
Yeah, I think what's been really positive is that both MPI and MFE are running a joint workshop, and they want to meet with the members from the group to talk through where things have landed. That going to just be done via Zoom, and will be on Monday, I think, to actually hook through the detail. So we'll be able to come as part of the draft that we can circulate to you. We can incorporate anything that we've gathered from that as well.
Really important to acknowledge that the work will be ongoing too, and we're not going to take the foot off the pedal.
Yeah, definitely.
Did you have a comment, David? Or
no, it's all been said.
Done and dealt with. Would you like to second the motion?
Nicole's got his hand up.
Oh, Nicole, I missed you.
Yes, I think government, just following on the conversation, I think government is aware of who put the inputs in, but I was quite surprised to read in the paper that Groundswell had taken credit for the changes, and they weren't actually formed then. So it's actually quite good to see the credit go to the people who did the work.
Yeah, don't miss an opportunity.
All right.
Just an administrative matter. The 30th of September's council meeting is a very brief meeting. It's there to set the rate. We're now going to add these two submissions to that agenda. So your commentary prior to that meeting is really encouraged, so that this is a long discussion on the 30th, since we have, I think, Great South coming to join us.
Okay, we've moved and we're seconded. Those in favour would say aye.
Aye.
Against no, that's agreed. That concludes the open session of this meeting. We have a publicly excluded session. You're going to give us the reason we need to be excluded?
Yep, so the matter is subject to proceedings in the Environment Court, and council is authorised to deliberate in private.
So would someone like to move that we enter into a publicly
excluded?
Move Nicole, seconded David. Those in favour would say aye. Against no, that's agreed. Boyd, can you exclude public transmission?